Hi, folks. Today we are going to be talking about something called gerrymandering and redistricting. And these are concepts that affect Congress. And really, these are two issues that are kind of the cons or why people dislike Congress, specifically gerrymandering. And trust me, I promise it has something to do with this really scary looking cartoon that I have. And we'll talk about that in here in just a second. So our goals for today are to define gerrymandering and reapportionment and explain how gerrymandering impacts specifically congressional elections. So those are our goals for this video. Now, we need to talk about something first, and we need to talk about what a congressional district really means and what that is. Now, something important to note is that districts are the areas that a representative represents. It's that small piece of land, kind of like what you see in the background here, that is represented by a congressperson in the House of Reps. Now, the US Census, right, is how we determine the number of representatives that each state gets in the House. And this US Census is taken every 10 years. Now, every 10 years, that number of representatives that is given to each state can change. Okay, this is called reapportionment. When we are redistributing the number of representatives each state gets in the House based on population. Okay, so every 10 years, states are reapportioned. And no matter what happens to states' population, there are always 435 representative seats in the House of Representatives. And that total number has been frozen since 1929. So we've had 435 members in the House since 1929. Now, after the census, state legislatures can redraw districts based on the new population total. And we'll talk about why they do this here in a second, right? But ultimately, we see these redrawing of districts, and this redrawing of districts can lead to gerrymandering. Each governor does have to sign off on the new districts. There are some legal requirements that we will talk about when it comes to districts. But just so you know, the governor does have to approve them of each state as well. Now, the history of gerrymandering dates back to like the early 1800s. And what gerrymandering is when districts are redrawn to basically give a certain political party or maybe a candidate an advantage, okay, in an election. And this is named for Massachusetts Governor Elbridge Gerry. Okay. And in 1812, he helped to redistrict Massachusetts to benefit his Democratic Republican Party. And when it was mapped out, that redrawing that he did was said to resemble the shape of a salamander, kind of like what you see here. And that was that picture that we saw at the very beginning. So, what we see happen is in order to gain this advantage, these districts are redrawn in some pretty funky shapes in order to give that political party or candidate that advantage when it comes time for election in the House. So, just to show you guys some of the impact that gerrymandering can have in terms of elections, I want to first point out this bottom. Oops, sorry, that'll pop up. But that bottom picture, this is a hypothetical map of North Carolina. And this would be if districts were drawn nonpartisan, meaning neither political party really had um, a control over the state and how it would be drawn simply based on the trends in voting. As you can see, there are 5 districts that would vote blue or Democrat, 5 districts that would vote red or Republican, and then 3 would be swing districts, meaning in an election they would either vote blue or red, Democrat or Republican. Now, let's jump to the top map. Okay, it's the same map, right? The state doesn't change, but this is what the Republican Party in the state legislature drew in terms of districts. Okay, Republicans controlled the state, so they drew districts ultimately to give them an advantage in elections. So, as you can see, the funky shapes that kind of come about through this process. And another impact here is that when they can draw districts, the party in power is able to favor themselves and make sure that they get reelected in elections. So, in the same state, we see now 10 Republican districts versus 5 if it were nonpartisan, and only 3 Democratic districts compared to the 5 from the nonpartisan. So here's how gerrymandering works. Gerrymandering, as I've said, helps the party in power gain seats in the House of Representatives. And usually this is done in 2 ways. One method is packing. So they're going to put as many members of one party into one district to limit the amount of seats that they win, right? So like you would put all as many as you can of the yellow in particular in one district to make sure that they don't win many seats. Another way that gerrymandering works is by cracking. And this is where you split voters of the opposing party into 2 different districts. Right? So I just wanted to kind of talk about those 2 things just to kind of give you guys an idea of what you're going to be seeing in the simulation that you guys complete. So here are some other examples specifically of packing, what we talked about here in various states. So you can see that based on the lines drawn in these districts, this particular one in South Carolina was really interested in getting a group of people together who vote a certain way. In this particular instance, it's Democratic. So most of the voters in this particular district vote Democratic. Now, there are a couple of rules that districts must follow or comply with when they're being drawn. The first is that they must be of equal population, and that must be between 640,000 and 650,000 people. So the districts must be equal in size, basically, when it comes to the number of people in that district. They must be connected or contiguous. We'll see that. So I know that this one doesn't really look connected, but it is. Do you see this line right here? That is that connection. This is honestly pretty borderline, but they have to be connected. If this small connection weren't there, this would not be a legal gerrymander. And also, even though the shapes can get kind of wild, the districts must be relatively compact. So they can't stretch from one end of the state to another. They have to be relatively compact or close in size. Okay. So, our learning objectives were to define gerrymandering and reapportionment and explain how gerrymandering impacts congressional elections. So, take a moment, go back. I know that this concept is not really easy to grasp. So, we're going to complete a simulation to kind of visualize this process. So, make sure to ask me questions as you are taking notes if you have any, and make sure to answer the questions in Edpuzzle. And I will talk to you guys soon. See you later.